In this chapter, we will discuss the process of evolution and look at the mechanism of natural selection. Evolution refers to both descent with certain modifications that take place due to the adaptation to its environment. It's an ongoing process. Descent from a common ancestor also explains that all organisms have a common ancestor. And there are various fossil records that will support this law of evolution and the concept behind it. So, what did people believe before the process of evolution was accepted? The pre-Darwinian ideas were that God is the supreme being, which we are not challenging anywhere with evolution. Evolution merely explains an educated process of how different organisms evolved with the time period. The Earth is fairly young, and if the Earth is fairly young, which is about 3.8 billion years ago, life or the simplest unicellular organisms arose. However, most people thought that the Earth was only a few thousand years old. They also believed that the species were specially created and fixed in time. And evolution mainly explains that global catastrophes take place where mass extinction makes or forces new species to evolve during this time. So species don't really change. So you don't really, we're not talking about a cat changing into a tiger. We're talking about how different conditions forced a species to adapt to a certain characteristic. Also, it's important to believe that and to understand that evolution does not happen in one generation. It is about population changing, which takes a lot of time period to happen. Um, a creator dictates the adaptations to the environment. So that's important to understand. Life did not just spontaneously arose from nothing. There had to be a process that helped the diversity in all organisms. Now, Carol Linnaeus, we talked about him earlier. He came up with the naming system that is used even now. For example, humans are called as the Homo sapiens, is because Carolus Linnaeus came up with a classification system in which he classified all plants and all animals. And in this classification system, a certain lineage could be traced. For example, if we look at any name, for example, if I write down Homo sapiens, we have a species and a genus name, and this together formulates a name of of humans. Keep in mind we're looking at a scientific process during this chapter, and this process is supported by adaptations that the organisms undergo. Now, Darwin is considered to be the father of the process of evolution, or he's the one who proposed the theory of evolution. And this concept is very debatable even now. Although he believed that common characteristics are shared through a common ancestry. The history of evolutionary thought did not just take place overnight. He had some supporting evidence from two naturalists before him. One is Georges Cuvier. He was the father of paleontology, which is studying fossils, and he pretty much also studied how fossil bones were structured in skull. He was a zoologist, so he studied a lot of comparative anatomy, and he developed a system of classifying animals. Um, he was also a very staunch advocate of special creation and the fixity of species. He really had a problem when a particular region showed a succession of life forms in the Earth's layer, and he explained these observation by certain hypotheses that a series of local catastrophes or weather conditions make certain species go extinct, and then these species were mixed in the layers of the soil and they show up as fossils. So he pretty much compared the anatomy of the fossils with the time period. Um, some of his followers even suggested that there had been worldwide catastrophes, and after each of these events, God created new sets of species. This his explanation of the history of life came to be known as catastrophism. On the other hand, Lamarck, who was another naturalist, or he was also a biologist, um, he came up with his own explanation of evolution, and he did not link any diversity with adaptation to the environment. His ideas were about uh, his ideas were not very clear. He concluded that, for example, in this example of the giraffe, he said that because the giraffe needed to reach to the trees to get their meals, so they just stretch their necks, and that characteristic of stretching that neck passed on to the next offspring and so forth. His explanation would be similar, like if somebody was really muscular and they gave birth to a baby, whether the father or the mother, the baby should just be muscular now. So he did not come up with any mechanism of inheritance as to why this would happen. So his explanation is not very clear. Who was Darwin? Darwin was biologist. He was studying theology in Great Britain, and he went out for a 5 year famous voyage in the Beagle. He was the captain of the ship, and this was in 1831. He traveled extensive areas. In one of his expeditions, he went in towards Australia, and he studied the biogeography of certain areas, and the soil appearance, and that's all geology, and he also collected fossils from all these areas. His famous voyage ended in Galapagos, and after he collected the samples from Galapagos and all these cruises that he had been doing, he came back to England and sat down with a lot of notes that he had made during his observation. And all these notes that he made during observation led him to suggest certain possibilities of how he found certain organisms in different areas to be similar. And he also observed that in different environment, species had a slight modification in them. Now, for example, one of his famous example is with the finches. He noticed with the finches that the finches that are present today have a different shaped beak as the ones he found in Galapagos, and the ones that he found in Galapagos depended on the size of the seed that they were feeding on, whether it was a cactus eating finch or a more pointed beak, or a more bulky seed dwelling finch. And according to and even if it was picking up insects, then the beak size would be more different, more like a woodpecker's finch. And this showed him that the finches were of different species, because that over the environment that they were in, the food supply that was given to them forced certain characteristics to be suitable for the environment. And that suitable finches, or those suitable finches, were the ones that survived. Those suitable finches were the ones that survived that time period, and they passed on their heritage to its other to the new generation and or to the new offsprings. Similarly, he observed the tortoises. Each of the islands seemed to have its own different type of tortoise, and he observed that some of them were long necked, and the ones that were long necked were those which were really present in the dry areas where food was scarce, and the turtle actually had to pull out, or pull out its long neck to reach the cactus and any kind of vegetation that was present there. However, tortoises that were present in very green foliage were short-necked, as they could reach their food very easily. So his statement is that adaptation occurs, and adaptation occurs based on the natural environment that is present to that species. The other thing that he also observed was geological time was also necessary, he said. In other words, it just would not happen like within a couple of months or a couple of years. For a certain species to be more stable in its environment, it would need a good number of years for a species to survive. So this concludes our first mini section